Chaps, welcome back to SGMMA. Now, in today's video, I'm going to be going through some of the superstars of the UFC and talking about what was, in my opinion, their best and worst performances inside the octagon. Let's get into it. And as you can see on your screen, we're starting with the heavyweight champion of the world, Jon Jones. Not the undisputed, because it is in dispute, but this is not the point of the video, right? We'll move on from that. Trying to pick the best ever Jon Jones UFC performance is difficult. I mean, the man is as close to undefeated as you can be without being undefeated. Shout out Matt Hamill, if you know what I mean. But for me, I'm going to go with the first time that Jon Jones stepped foot in a UFC octagon and fought for a world title when he beat Shogun Rua back in 2011. What was so impressive about that was, as much as Jones had racked up a couple of half-decent wins over some good contenders, the Ryan Bader win aged very well. He beat Machichenko as well in a main event, which was very, very nice. Shogun wasn't that far removed from his legendary days in Pride. It was a few years later, but it wasn't years and years and years ago. When Lyoto Machida won the light heavyweight title, everybody, especially Joe Rogan on the commentary at the time, was saying this is the Machida era. Shogun comes in, gets robbed in the first fight. He should have got the decision after 5 rounds, and then chins him in the second. And everyone's thinking, right, Shogun's already been a Pride legend. Now's the time to be a UFC legend. But didn't happen, did it? Jones has always had superb Muay Thai, but the knee he landed on Shogun is probably the best knee he's ever landed and one of the best that I've ever seen landed. There are loads of others you could pick from. I would have put the second DC fight on here, or even the first one. The problem is they have asterisks. We know what they are, we're not going to go into them. Do you know what I mean? So I'm going to say Jones's first ever title fight win against Shogun was his best performance. And in terms of his worst night, I mean, it's very difficult. He's not had very many nights that were not brilliant. Never mind mediocre and especially not bad. He's hardly had any of those. But I've gone with Thiago Santos at UFC 235. Really, really simple reasoning. He only had one way to particularly beat Jon Jones. He wasn't a 5-tool pony who had a multifaceted threat on the title reign of Jon Jones. He had a big left hand and that was it. When you factor in the massive knee injury in the first round, the fact that Jones allowed him to win 3-2 on one judge's scorecard, I think he had an off night. An off night where he still was able to beat a dangerous, high-ranked contender and remain UFC light heavyweight champion. Granted, but for his incredibly high standards, that was a bad night for him, I think. So I'm going to go with Mr. Santos. Now, I know what you're thinking. Reyes. Jones looked good in the Reyes fight. He was slick, he was moving well. Reyes was just a bit slicker and moved better. I think the version of Jon Jones that fought Reyes would have finished an injured Santos. That's what I'm trying to say. Next up, I want to talk about Stipe Miocic, beautiful people, because Stipe Miocic went out in one of the most nonchalant retirement speeches, interviews that you will ever see. But that's kind of who he is. He's kind of reserved. He's not outgoing in your face. So he just kind of said, right, I'm off, see yous. Obviously a bad way to go out inside the octagon with a fight and how it played out. But yeah, I'm not surprised that was how he ended his career and used his mic time, just straight to the point. He's been a legend of the sport. I'm a big fan of Stipe, always have been, always will be. So, all the best in retirement, champ. Let's talk about your best night. There have been a few. Obviously, if you're UFC champion, you've had some good performances. The Overeem one was good. The JDS knockout in round 1 was good. The way he turned around the rematch with Daniel Cormier, the fight where he actually won the title against Fabricio Verdum with that lovely step back right hand was brilliant. But I've gone for his first fight with Francis Ngannou at UFC 220. The context here was so massively important. Huge. This was a matter of 6-8 weeks, I think, after he decapitated nearly Alistair Overeem at UFC 218. And to be able to have the IQ to either be all the way in and get brilliant takedowns or all the way out and stay out the way of Francis's power was brilliant. He had the fight IQ, the cardio, the intelligence. And he did crack Ngannou as well with a few really good shots. Everything you'd expect from Stipe, that was on show that night. So for me, it's number 1 in his career. And in terms of his worst, I mean, he didn't look great against Stefan Struve earlier on in his MMA career. Neither in his first fight with Junior Dos Santos. The first DC fight, not a lot really happened. It was a very, very quick flash elbow that knocked him out. So you can't really take too much from that. And the Ngannou one at UFC 260 was, in my opinion, his second worst. But he still looked like Stipe in there. He still looked relatively light and quick on his feet. And he was packing a good punch if he could land. I mean, Ngannou hurt him. He hurt him back and he rushed in. And then Ngannou caught him with that kind of hook / jab. It was it was either a straight hook or a wide jab, whichever way you want to look at it. For me, his worst outing was last Saturday night, UFC 309, which is not surprising. He was 42. Very inactive. You could see the ring rust. It was a shame. It was almost a situation where I was looking at him and I could see his mind going, thinking, oh, I can do this, I can jump in there. There's an opening. I can advance, I can attack, I can capitalise. His feet and his body weren't able to get him there quick enough to capitalise. It was kind of sad to watch. So yeah, UFC 309 loss against Jon Jones was Stipe's worst night, and unfortunately, it was also his last. Next up, Mr. de Blanche, Charles Oliveira, who got a interesting win at UFC 309 over Michael Chandler, his second win over Iron Mike. Not as wild and mental as the first one. The fifth round was obviously a bit crazy, but it was a measured, calculated, kind of beat down / piece apart of Michael Chandler for 20 minutes of that fight. Maybe 21 if you want to be particularly specific, because he had that minute at the end where he was back in control. So, it wasn't his best night. It was a good night. It was his first ever 25-minute fight of his entire career. He has the most UFC finishes for a reason, people. But for me, the best night of Charles Oliveira was UFC 269 when he beat Dustin Poirier. This is another one where the context is massively important. By the time of 269, Dustin Poirier had beaten Conor McGregor twice. He'd beaten Anthony Pettis, Justin Gaethje, Eddie Alvarez, Dan Hooker, loads of other top guys. And the only people who had beaten him in recent history, basically, was a flash knockout by Michael Johnson and a fight with Khabib where he actually did quite well. And he went into the Oliveira fight as favourite. Now, you could say that was maybe hype after fighting Conor twice, but I picked him to beat Oliveira. I thought he would. I thought he'd knock him out. And he didn't. And even though he did get hurt early, the way that Oliveira was able to effectively Oliveira him, if you will, survive an early storm and then slowly break them down and get the sub, it was a vintage Oliveira performance, and that's why I think it's his best. Charles Oliveira was very up and down in the early stages of his UFC career, but for me, the worst one, the worst of the bunch, if you will, was Cowboy Cerrone. Definitely. Full disclosure, Cowboy Cerrone, especially back then, was capable of mass destruction on many a foe. I mean, look at the Rick Story fight for an example, but I took the time to rewatch all of Oliveira's old fights before UFC 309 as a bit of like a history lesson for myself, and I was watching the Cowboy fight just thinking, how did this guy go on to be a top 3, 4, 5 in the pound for pound list and a relatively long time lightweight champion and one of the best in the division's history? I ain't got a clue. But it's a credit to him for the resurgence. But yeah, his loss against Cowboy, first round TKO, in 2012, I think it was, that was Oliveira's worst night for me. We're going to move on to Israel Adesanya, who for me had his best night in either his first fight against Robert Whittaker, where he unified the middleweight title, or his Fight Island bout with Paulo Costa. Both brilliant, a lot of similarities in them as well. He was spiteful, venomous, which is not something Adesanya's always been. I've gone with the Whittaker fight again, when you add the context of who Whittaker was at the time. I mean, to beat a Romero twice, especially with a big injury in one of the fights, Whittaker was the uncrowned champion of the division while GSP and Bisping had their little legacy fight, if you will. That sounds quite familiar. Where have I heard that before? Two old farts having a fairly meaningless matchup while a young interim champion is just sat there. Where have I heard that? Maybe it's just an MSG thing, people, who knows. But in terms of his worst night, for me, this was very, very easy. I mean, he's had some losses in the UFC. The Jan Blachowicz one was a credit more to Jan. I'm using his offensive grappling and his size really well. Against Duplessis, he looked pretty sharp for most of the fight. But in the end, he just got caught with a big shot. And then the way that Dricus was able to so quickly finish that fight was actually a credit more to Dricus than against Izzy. And the Alex fight at UFC 281 again at MSG, he looked good for most of the fight. He was winning it. Used a bit of offensive grappling as well to really control Alex. But Alex always carries his power, as we know, and he got clipped and finished. But the worst one was Sean Strickland by a mile. Let's just go back a minute. Jan Blachowicz was switching stances, wonderful jab, underrated kickboxing in general, brilliant offensive grappling, great top control, really, really good, well-rounded mixed martial arts performance. And then you go to Duplessis. Strong, powerful, unorthodox, took a lot of great shots, especially downstairs from Adesanya, and brilliantly found a way to get around it, hurt him, take him down, and submit him. And Alex Pereira hits like a bus. We know that. And those two have fought so many times, they know each other so well. It's so evenly matched at most of the time. The idea of Alex finding something to hurt him was always there. But Strickland, I mean, my word. No disrespect at all to Sean Strickland. Because what he does really well. But a guy who is explained and marketed by the UFC as this dynamic, insane, switch stancing, sleek, back foot kickboxer. Got dominated over 5 rounds, literally by a bloke who had a 1-2 and a teep, and that was it. And got dropped badly by a guy who, let's be honest, doesn't hit very hard. That was an off night for Adesanya. Maybe all the build-up stuff and all the, let's just say, allegations. Let's just leave it allegations that were kind of thrown around in the build-up. I mean, he obviously, I think that was the fight that he broke down on stage. That may have been 305, actually. I may be remembering that wrong, but maybe it was a mental block, something wrong with him upstairs rather than like physically, but whatever it was, awful night for Adesanya. Right, Max Holloway next. I want to get something very clear first. I'm talking about the best fight performance, not the best moment of Max Holloway and all these other guys' UFC careers, because the best moment was the last 10 seconds against Justin Gaethje at 300. We know this, but the best performance was Calvin Kattar by a mile. Max has always been heralded with a fantastic chin. I mean, it got cracked by Ilya, but I think he cracks everybody's chin, if I'm honest with you. But he's always been known as having a brilliant chin, and he takes a shot well. That's because he gets hit a lot, if I'm honest with you. So he's not really somebody that I would expect to dance around on the back foot and almost kind of Ali, hit and don't get hit kind of thought process. But that's what he did against Calvin Kattar. I mean, Kattar did land a few. He actually landed quite a bit over the 5 rounds, more than I thought watching the thing. But yeah, that was Anderson Silva against Forrest Griffin kind of vibes, where it's just like, you're not from this world, pal. The most precise, output-heavy, destructive 25-minute beatdown you will ever see in mixed martial arts. Nothing will ever beat that, I don't think. We've seen some ones that have been pretty gnarly, especially recently, but that was a different level. Definitely the best night of Max Holloway's MMA career in the UFC. In terms of his worst, Max, like Charles Oliveira, had a few stumblings on his way up, less than Charles. It was more plain sailing for Max than Charles, but I think his worst performance was his third fight with Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 276, International Fight Week 2022. It's the only fight I've ever seen Max in where he looked about 3 steps behind. I mean, now Max has lost fights. The 236 Dustin Poirier fight, he lost, but he was very much in the fight all the time. It was the power advantage on Poirier's side, the size advantage, that really made the difference. And if he was younger, he lost against Conor and Dennis Bermudez, but he was barely not a teenager. He was like 20, 21 at that point. But in terms of as an adult and a fully grown mixed martial artist, yeah. The first 2 fights with Volk were close, as we know. A lot of people think Max won at least one of those fights. I think Volk won on both. Just saying. That was a moment, I was watching Max, I was thinking, I don't think you're quite there anymore. I think you're on the decline. And then he puts a great run together, including the capstone of the Gaethje fight, gets himself another world title shot. So I was wrong at that point, but yeah. Max's performance against Volkanovski in their third fight, the trilogy, was by far the worst I've seen him. Especially after he became Max Holloway, if you know what I mean. And I have to finish with the notorious Mr. Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor's best night, again, it's about best performance, not moment. The best moment was the 13-second knockout of Jose Aldo. The best performance was Eddie Alvarez at UFC 205. From second one to the final seconds of the fight, just before the finish in the second round, Conor McGregor was punch perfect. His ability to manipulate space, find angles, almost make Eddie believe he was further away than he was. Make Eddie think he's safe and then just step through with that wide stance. Absolutely punch perfect. One of the best striking displays I've seen across any combat sport in my life. It was that good. Prime Conor was that good. But unfortunately, it didn't last very fucking long, did it? And in terms of his worst, he did okay against Khabib at times. He won a round, which was more than I thought he was going to get. The Diaz lost their first fight. Nate is very good at making people do that kind of thing. I was surprised it worked on Conor, because as much as he is aggressive and explosive, he's very fight IQ heavy. He's very smart in there. I'm surprised he fell into that trap with Diaz. So that was up there for consideration, but it has to be one of the Poirier fights. And for me, I'm going to go with the third one at 264. I know it ended with that leg break, which maybe it isn't as much of a Dustin Poirier finished him. His broken leg finished him. I understand the narrative there. But at 257, he was at least landing some decent shots. He caught him with a lovely little uppercut left-hand combo that maybe in years gone by may have rocked or dropped Dustin Poirier. We don't know, but the first round of that third fight was a 10-8. I don't care what anyone says, that was a 10-8. He got battered by Poirier. It was a decisive and clinical round from Poirier with the ground and pound than Khabib ever managed on Conor. So, yeah, that round alone, regardless of the leg break, is enough to make it the worst night for Conor. And he's not fought since, and he broke his damn leg. So there you go. That's it, people. We've spoke about the best and worst performances of 6 of the UFC's biggest stars. I really enjoyed making this video. It was nice to go kind of back through the archives a little bit. And the reason why I've only done 6 is 1, the video's not too long, and 2, I could do a part 2. If you guys like this, I can maybe look at Legends next time, the likes of Liddell, Shogun, Machida, Couture maybe. If you want to see that kind of video, let me know. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, leave a like. If you haven't seen some of my other content, I suggest you do, because it's good stuff if I don't say so myself. The support recently has been lovely. I'm back in the game. Bloody bish bash bosh. Bob's your aunt, Fanny's your uncle. Take care. See yous later.